you start looking at numbers, it's about like everything else. They do require, and at least the discussion on how the numbers were found. The VPC of the Violence Policy Center was actually named in some of their discussions, and we can go back and forth on the discussion of mass violence and how these are actually carried out with concealed carry permit holders. But it does need to be pointed out that almost 30% of the tragedies that is reported by the Violence Policy Center were suicides in this on concealed carry permit, not criminal in the sense of mass violence as being portrayed. The numbers also included a couple of cases actually where the permit holders were counted, although they were operating a motor vehicle in a drunk driving case. I mean, this is not a gun violence case, and they were counted in that. And in some instances, they were double counted in many ways. But even with the VPC number, and assuming that the claim of 636 is, including the suicides, are correct, and when we get into the idea of the concealed carry permit itself, there are 11 million concealed handgun permit holders in the U.S. right now. An annual number of deaths of that group rate is 0.0083%, and the non-suicide rates, if you take those out, is obviously even lower at 0.0058%. Why that is important, and why I believe this amendment is a valid amendment and one that needs to be appropriated and passed, is because when you look at that in the abstract, you may say, well, that's just looking at different numbers, and you can say these folks, it's just not a lot in there. But I want to actually put it in even a little bit more perspective, and the perspective is this. The police officers are rarely convicted of firearms-related violations, but they are convicted at about 7 times the rate of concealed carry permit holders. In other words, police officers, a violation of firearms violations occur at 16.5 per 100,000 officers as you look through that. But yet when you look at the rate for concealed carry permit owners who commit crimes, it is markedly lower. In fact, the 25 states with the highest rate of permit holding experience markedly lower rates of murder and violent crime. The last thing about this is there's the interesting takeaway here is that the reason that they are lower, and the reason you see this even with 11 million folks carrying a concealed carry permit, is the desire not to lose that concealed carry permit over many things that would cause them to lose those. And the concealed carry permit holders are the most law-abiding group in the country and are a deterrent to crime. The type of person that would go through the process, as spoken of by the gentleman from Colorado and others and myself, is not folks that we don't take that trivially. It's like a license to drive. You don't take it trivially. You want to have that possibility, and you don't want to have it taken away. So I think the gentleman from Wisconsin is making a valid point here because when you deal with the concealed weapons issue, you're dealing with it in a way that I believe is showing that in the state of Georgia, as I have said, there is a background check that is already done. And as we go through this bill, and as I had, looked at this personally, and as we go forward, this group of individuals are reluctant to use their guns in improper ways because they want to keep that possibility of having that for their own protection and others. And I don't see this as an amendment really we should be going this much in depth. If states may differ, but the statistics do not. The statistics do not when it comes to these. The gentleman from Texas, seek time. Okay. At that point then, Mr. Chairman, I would again just say this is an amendment that needs to be passed. It is one that I think when you look at it, you can differ on wildly as far as what you believe is actually trying to occur here. But when you look at this, there's not one person on the other side of the aisle can point to where concealed carry permit holder loses their permits for any type of firearms violation at more than 1,000% where it would actually, make a difference. I think this is something that is a common sense amendment. I think it's an amendment that should be incorporated into what is otherwise a bill that is not on point. And with that, I'll yield back.
Mr. Chairman.
Take, for example, my state of Florida. In Florida, concealed carry permit holders are 8 times less likely to commit crimes than members of law enforcement. And so these are some of the most law-abiding citizens that we have in our state that are concealed carry permit holders.
I think the interesting argument made by the gentleman, but if those are also NICS denials, and my question is why are we not prosecuting? That's another question for that issue.
I'm happy to answer that.
On a false question. I yield to the gentleman from Texas.
And yeah, I'm glad this number was brought up. Another one of our colleagues across the aisle brought up 3 million people who were denied access to a firearm because they tried to acquire one illegally. Now we're hearing 3.5 million. The fact is, those were the first hits when the name is submitted in the most generic, phonetically spelled form, And over 96%, and it may only be 1% of the 3 million, but over 96% turned out to be false hits. And when they went to second and sometimes third review, they found this was not the person in issue that was trying to get a gun or get a background check completed. So it's not 3 million, it's not 3.5 million. And under the Obama administration, there was 1 year where they only prosecuted, I think it was 4 convictions out of all of those, hundreds of thousands of false hits, but only resulted in 4 convictions. I yield back to my friend.
The bill is considered, the amendment is considered as read. The gentleman is recognized for the purpose of supporting his amendment.
Right. I am a little surprised with reserving point of order because this is attempting to fix a problem in the bill. We had heard about the numbers from Pennsylvania earlier a couple of times. 16,000, this is 2016, there were around 16,000 initial denials. We were told 13,000 was how many people that shouldn't have guns that didn't get them, but actually there were only 356 convictions for violating the law and trying to get a gun. There were 3,000 or so people that appealed, but there were thousands and thousands of people that couldn't afford the money to appeal. We don't know how many of those didn't get a gun that they should have been allowed to have so they could protect themselves, who got raped, who got harmed because they didn't have means of self-defense, because the law improperly kept them from, as a law-abiding citizen, getting a means of self-defense. The reason for this is they use sometimes phonetic spelling, sometimes it's not the actual information regarding the person who is applying for the gun. So if somebody is applying for a gun, why don't we use all of the descriptors we have about that? Everything we have about that, put that in the application to find out whether or not this person is entitled to have a gun. We've heard over and over and over for hours and hours and hours how these things only take about 90 seconds. And then we heard the last couple hours about how terrible it was that it often takes over 3 days. So much for the 90-second argument that we heard for hours and hours. Now, apparently, there's too much that takes over 3 days. But this is a common sense thing. Put the descriptors in there for the person that's applying. Don't generalize and use other things. Let's look up the person that is applying for the gun. And one of the things that really breaks my heart here today, we have some absolutely wonderful people that truly want to make a difference. They truly want to make sure there's not another Parkland that happens. And they've been assured and they've been so helpful in trying to push something through. And just so that we correct the record, it hadn't been 21 years since anything was done on gun control. It happened in the last Congress. The Fix Nix bill, it passed, it was signed by President Trump, became law. That wasn't 21 years ago. That was the last Congress. But my big concern is people that have worked so hard. They've showed up for hearings. They've been here. They've cheered. They've wanted to see something good. Since we haven't addressed root causes, and it's clear that what has been done today, even if it all becomes law, it would not have prevented Parkland. Then the next Parkland that occurs, there are people that work so hard to make this stuff happen, and they'll go, what was all of that about? All our pain and money out of pocket, all the things we did, and and these things still keep happening. What was all that we did for? And I hope they will not become too jaded, because we do need people participating. They just have to be careful to read and think through and figure out who you can trust to do things that will make a difference, that will save people for the future, not just pass something for the sake of passing something so we can say we really did something, even though it won't stop the very thing that people were hoping to stop with the legislation. So this is really, it should have been in the law. It should be part of the law already. It's not. Let's look up all of the descriptors, all of the person's name as it actually is, all of that information that we have. Use that, look it up. Let's see if it's this person or somebody else that's not supposed to have a gun. And let's don't miss somebody because we make it so generic. We miss the actual person we're supposed to be looking up. So I think it's a good amendment. I think it could help make a difference, that it could help people be prevented from getting a gun who shouldn't. And that's why I urge my colleagues to support this amendment. I yield back.
Gentleman yields back.